Back in the 1960s, I used to commentate on a really dramatic and exciting form of motorsport called rallycross. And one of the top people in it was a lovely bloke called John Button. He used to race a VW, which he called the Colorado Beetle. And he had a son, and he called his son Jenson. And now he's a world champion. Nice to be with you, Jenson.
How you doing, Murray?
Jenson, you and I have both got something in common. We've got racing fathers. John raced cars, mine raced bikes. But when you were young, did you want to race or did John want you to race?
That is a very good question. I started when I was 7, karting. And the reason why I had a kart wasn't down to me, it was my dad. He obviously loved motor racing. He raced in rallycross and autocross for years. And he bought me a kart because my parents split up when I was young and he would have me on the weekends, so it was something to do. I was a very active child and I got bored very easily. I still do. So he bought me the kart and I loved it from the word go. But he always used to say when I started that it was his passion and I was just the pilot.
He was pushing you along all the time, was he?
Yeah, pushing, but not in a bad way. I think there are a lot of fathers when kids are young, they push them and it's too much. And either they fall out of love with the sport or it just causes friction between father and son or father and daughter. So, he was very controlled in pushing me. He gave me the right amount of support.
Now, you had a stellar career in karts and in Formula Ford and in Formula 3, and you had a test in the McLaren Formula 1 car, but you caused an absolute sensation when you had a test in the Prost. Tell me about that.
First of all, I drove the McLaren. Funnily enough, I saw that car the other day that I drove at the MTC.
Same car?
Yeah, the same one I drove. And then I drove the Prost. I was actually on holiday at the time in Mexico. And I got a call, and it was my manager at the time and said, Alain would like you to drive his car. It's like, wow, okay. The F1 car, not the Formula 3000 car. I said, yeah, the Formula 1 car. So flew to Barcelona immediately and drove around the circuit, a circuit that I've raced on for 17 years now. Little did I know then that would be the case. Jumped in the car, felt comfortable straight away. The car was actually a very good car to drive. The engine didn't last as long as I would have liked. I think we did 33 laps before the engine seized.
How difficult was it to translate yourself from Formula 3 with about 160 horsepower up to Formula 1?
It was okay. I mean, I did Formula 3000 testing. I tested for 2 teams that winter, so the step wasn't so big, but also it came with so much sort of grip, the power, and everything just worked as it should. In a Formula 3000 car, the gearbox, it was the old sequential gearbox then, you could never get the thing in gear. Whereas the F1 car, everything was just smooth and it ran as you wanted it to. And then it was just about pushing the car to the limits, which became natural from a very early age. The only thing you have to get used to in an F1 car, it's not the power, it's the downforce and the understanding that when you go faster through a high-speed corner, you get more grip. And I think for most people that's very difficult to understand, but it felt so natural jumping in that car.
Well, as a result of all that, you get a chance to drive for Williams. I say you got a chance because you were in opposition. You had a rival, a chap called Bruno Junqueira, who came from Brazil.
Yep.
And you literally had to do a shootout.
Yeah.
And if I'm right, you didn't know until the day of the launch whether it was going to be you driving the car or Junqueira. Now, this must have been enormous pressure for you.
Yeah, it was all very confusing as for a 19-year-old. I didn't really understand the situation. Initially, I was told, do I want to come and test the car? Of course, I'm going to say yes. Frank, before I did drive the car, Frank Williams said, are you ready for Formula 1? And I said no. I was a truthful 19-year-old. Yeah. And then I spoke to my dad and he said, you're kidding me. You didn't say that to Frank. I said, yeah, I wanted to be honest. And he said, maybe be a little bit less honest. So I called Frank back and I was a little bit less honest. But he let me have a chance to drive the car in winter testing, and it was a bit of a pain because the engine was a brand new engine at that time, and we had reliability issues, so we spent a lot of time in the garage. But it was good because it gave me time to spend with the mechanics, the engineers. It's such a different atmosphere to anything I'd ever raced before. I had no experience of setting up a car whatsoever, so all I had was just my ability to drive fast and try and learn as quick as I could. But I still didn't know it was for the race seat. I thought it was for a test drive because I went to the factory to see Frank again, and he said, we have a list of drivers that we have that possibly could race for us in 2000. You're not even on the list.
I can just see Frank saying it.
Yeah, you're not even on the list. And I was sat there thinking, why am I here? I'm so confused. The test went very well in the end. The lap times were good, consistency was good, and I learned very quickly. But as you said, I didn't know until the day of the launch that I had the drive.
Well, you got the drive at 19. You were the youngest Formula One driver at the time by a very long way. And you drove for Williams in 2000. You had two tough taskmasters in Frank Williams and Patrick Head. How did you get on with them?
Well, Frank was actually soft, very soft compared to Patrick.
Yeah.
Frank always said, push. If something happens, you'll learn from it. And I remember coming into the pit lane in Hockenheim, and from the pit entry to the speed limit line in the pits, I was losing a second to Ralph, my teammate. So I pushed, I lost it, crashed the car in the pit lane, and I walked back to the pits, obviously head hanging low, and first of all I saw Patrick, and Patrick said, what were you doing? You crashed in the pit lane, and Frank said, Patrick, he said, I told him to push and he will learn from this, and he had a big smile on his face. And it was good, two very experienced people within the team, really helping me blossom as a driver.
Well, you got the drive, you performed extremely well in the year 2000, as I say, at the tender age of 19. But you've had a few disappointments in your life, and surely one of them must have been at the end of the season when you discovered that, having done well and expecting to go on with Williams, you find that you're being replaced by Juan Pablo Montoya. You were, to put it bluntly, out on your ear.
Yes.
Frank had offset your contract, and you were now driving for Benetton, and you were driving subsequently for Renault. Now you had a very different boss there, flamboyant, extrovert, Italian, Flavio Briatore, who gave you a very hard time, accused you of being a lazy playboy. I mean, how did you react to all that?
Well, first of all, towards the end of the 2000 season, I knew the situation. Frank's very straightforward in that way, and I didn't have a contract for 2001. I never thought that I would have the drive in 2001 because he had a deal with Juan Pablo. So I had to look elsewhere, and obviously Flavio gave me the chance to drive for Benetton in 2001. I remember the launch day, it was in Venice, and I was so sick, so ill that day, probably the illest I've ever been.
What, nerves or food? Or?
No, I think it was food poisoning, but I should have known then that the year was going to be a disappointment from the word go. But a very tough year. The car was...
Well, it wasn't a good car.
No.
You had Fisichella as your teammate.
I think Fisichella is possibly the best driver in the world at driving a bad car.
Oh, really?
He was amazing at driving bad cars. And he did a better job than me.
Well, he had a lot more experience than you.
He did, but I also didn't learn enough at Williams because the car was easy to drive. I could do enough with my natural ability to get good results. Whereas then you get to a team where suddenly you're pitted against a very good driver, but also I didn't have the experience to improve the car. So Flavio was very outspoken, and some of the things obviously were exaggerated that he said. But to be fair, he helped me in a lot of ways.
Are you thin-skinned? I mean, was this hurting?
Yeah, of course. I'm very, very, very thin-skinned.
Not very encouraging.
Yeah, well, it wasn't, but it did help me in a way as well, because it definitely toughened me up. And I learnt a lot towards the end of that year in 2001. Spent a lot of time with Mike Gascoigne, who was the main man in charge of the car, who's also a very tough guy, and Flavio, and it really did help me, it strengthened me as a person, but also as a racing driver. And 2002, I came out much stronger, and it was actually, in terms of my ability and what I achieved, I was very happy with in 2002.
But if losing your Williams drive because of Montoya was hard on you, at the end of 2002, the same thing happens again.
Yeah.
And this time it's Fernando Alonso.
Yeah.
He's in, you're out. How did you end up at BAR? Were you scurrying around the pitch saying, anyway?
Well, again, this was a strange one, because end of 2002, I thought that I would be driving in 2003 with Renault. Very different situation to Williams, because I did a really good job. I outscored my teammate, much more experienced teammate, Jarno Trulli. And it was a shock when I got the call from Flavio saying that we've employed Fernando. So obviously we went out looking for another drive. Dave Richards came along and gave us the opportunity. You know, very thankful for that opportunity, because I had such a great time working with that team. And immediately at the launch of the car, I felt comfortable, but also I had a teammate that was a world champion.
Now, you had a teammate who was a world champion in Jacques Villeneuve, but you also had a teammate in Jacques Villeneuve who was always playing mind games with his drivers, trying to get a psychological advantage over them. I remember him doing it to Damon Hill, and he did it to you, likened you to somebody from a boy band. Now, had you developed a thick enough skin to let that bounce off you by then?
I had, but it was also the first time that I had a teammate with that experience, and also that would try and play mind games. So it was all a new experience for me, even though I had the experience of driving 3 different Formula 1 cars, and the experience of learning and progressing and making myself a better driver in terms of not just driving the car, but setting up the car. It was still a shock, you know, to have somebody that would put you down before you even started driving the car. And he's your teammate as well. So it was tough initially, but I had a lot of support from the team. They really welcomed me, the team.
And you won, and he lost because he left the team before the end of the season.
Yeah.
And then in 2004, you had by far your best season yet. You had, 10 podiums, third in the championship, and the only 2 people who were ahead of you were
the Ferraris.
Ferrari. By now, were you feeling a hardened, experienced racing driver for Formula One?
It felt like I had been around forever at the end of the 2004 season. And I remember at the Autosport Awards, I got the International Driver of the Year, ahead of Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello, which was, 24-year-old to have that accolade. It was a very special feeling. And I think everybody knew how strong the Ferrari was that year. You know, they were untouchable. So third was the best we could do. My best memory is probably my first pole position from 2000 in my career in Formula One. Was in Imola, in front of Michael by 3/10.
2004 was good. 2005, not so good. BAR disappear. Honda takes over the team. 2006, you're doing much better. I was a Honda's Formula One ambassador at the time. Used to interview you at every race. And when we came to the Hungarian Grand Prix, I thought, nothing ever happens in Hungary. I'm going to go on a cruise.
I remember.
So I went on a cruise, and what happened? You won your first race. Your 113th Grand Prix, and you won. You must have felt as though you'd had a weight taken off your shoulders.
Yes, definitely. 2006 season, that was 10 years ago, was, I was very confident in myself and in the team. I know that we didn't have the outright performance in the dry, but then Hungary came. In practice, we had an engine failure, and back then it was a 10-place grid penalty. So I qualified 4th.
14th.
I qualified 4th in terms of outright pace and qualifying. Had to start 14th. It rained, and then it was just a fight. The whole race, fighting through the field with Michael, with Fernando. We're all fighting through the field together because they were back from because they had penalties as well. So it made it a great race. You know, there was so much action,
Yes.
so much fighting. And then I found myself with 10 laps to go with a 35-second lead. And, you know, people say, you know, racing drivers always say that they just want the race to finish when they're leading, because you hear everything. You think you're going to have a failure or run out of fuel or something. For me, it was completely the opposite. You know, it was a position...
You wanted to go on, did you?
I've never found myself in Formula One. I've been racing, it was my 7th season. And I just loved every second of it, you know, and I didn't want it to end. And the finish line came way too soon. And I think the reason why I wanted it to go on forever was because I knew it wasn't going to happen again for a long time, because the car wasn't quick enough to win races in the dry.
What happened in 2007 and 2008 with Honda, because they went down? What was the problem?
It's funny actually, because through most of my career, you know, there were still some good races every year. You know, 2004 we had 10 podiums. 2005 there were still podiums. 2006 the win, and then 2007 came, and it was just 2007 came, and it was just a really difficult year. You know, we went a direction with the car, and it was completely the wrong direction. And you can see that by the design when you look at it now. It was so different to everything else out there, and it just didn't work.
But it seemed a good idea at the time, didn't it?
Yeah, and lots was changing within the team, and it felt like we were losing good people. And it felt like we had no leadership. And I think that really hurt the mechanics, it hurt the designers, the engineers. They felt like there was no leadership, there was no direction for the future.
Now, Ross Brawn had joined to run the team as team principal with all the skills and experience that he's got, but he didn't have enough time to do it because Honda pulled out at the end of 2008 because of the worldwide financial crash. And you're out of luck again. It's happened to Williams,
Yeah.
it's happened to Williams, it's happened to Renault, and now it happens at Honda. What was going through your mind then? Because you'd been at racing cars in Formula One for a long time by now. Did you ever think of jacking it in? Or?
No, definitely not. You know, I obviously loved my win in Hungary, but that wasn't what I came into Formula One to achieve. Just one win. It wasn't enough. So I got the call when I got off the plane. I'd landed it at Gatwick, which isn't my favourite airport anyway. And I'm waiting for my bags to come out. And then I get the call from my manager, from Richard, saying Honda have pulled out, you know, because of the issues, you know, around the world, the crisis. And I was just in shock.
Was Richard scurrying around to find something for Richard Goddard?
Yeah.
Was he scurrying around trying to find something for you?
Yeah, of course.
Or were you, or both of you?
Both of us were. And, you know, Richard, he's the best Formula One manager, personally, I think there's ever been. And I always know that he would do the best for me as a manager and as one of my best friends. And we had the opportunity to race for Toro Rosso. And that was from France, first. So we had quite a long, lengthy chat about that. But I also didn't think it would be a team at that point that would give me the opportunity to be close to the front fighting. So we pushed Nick Fry and Ross Brawn very hard to look for somebody to come in and take over the team. We also came up with a couple of options of people to come in and who had the money to spend to come in and take over the team. They didn't take that route in the end, and they ended up taking over the team themselves, which none of it really made any difference to us as long as I was racing. I knew that we had a good car. We just didn't have anything in the back of it. We didn't have any horsepower. There was no engine because obviously Honda took everything.
But then thanks to Martin Whitmarsh, you got Mercedes power in the Brawn. And at last, Jenson, you've got a car in which you can exploit your very considerable talent. And you win 6 of the first 7 races. You become world champion. You have a car advantage, and I'm fascinated to know this. It revolved around you stuffing your leg down a hole in the cockpit.
No, that was a couple of years later.
Oh,
that was a couple of years later. But if you take it back to 2008, we had a very difficult year in 2008, and we weren't developing the car because we knew 2009, regulation change. We put all of our efforts into that. And Honda, to be fair, put a lot of effort into building the new car. So a lot of it was down to them.
Yes.
And I still feel that, I still know that a lot of the guys that work for Honda were so happy when we did win the World Championship because they still felt a part of it. So we strapped the Mercedes engine in the back, and thanks to Martin and Brawn. And yeah, we won 6 out of 7 races. And yes, we turned up at the first race with a very competitive car, and we had an advantage. But we never had an advantage.
You've got to be able to exploit that advantage.
Yeah, you have, but we never had an advantage like you've seen the last 2 years.
Right, right.
And that's something that people forget. We had the double diffuser, yes, but 2 other teams also had a double diffuser. And every team had a double diffuser after a few races in.
What was your high point of your championship year? Monaco?
Monaco is always very special, but for me, Monaco, the highlight of that weekend was qualifying, not the race. When you're on pole in Monaco, there's a very good chance you're going to win the race. It's putting it on pole that's where you are under pressure to perform. And to put it on pole there meant so much to me in front of my friends and family. Other high points, every win is a high point. But I'd probably say my last win in Turkey.
Right.
Istanbul.
At the end of 2009, as far as a lot of people in Formula One were concerned, you took leave of your senses. You went raving mad. You decided that you were going to leave what had been Brawn and was now Mercedes, and you were going to join the new team. The new team, not only being McLaren, but McLaren with Lewis Hamilton, who was world champion and had been with them for several years, and knew everybody in the team. And everybody in Formula One was saying, Jenson has given himself an impossible mountain to climb.
Including Ross Brawn. He also said that to me when I left, when I walked out the door. But 2009 was a great season, but I also knew that we could not continue that into 2010 with the amount of money that we were spending on development. We stopped development in August, September of 2009 on the car, and just prayed and hoped it was enough, and it was. So for me, I wanted to be with the team that I felt could give me the chance to win races every year, whether it was a World Championship or not. I think being at the front and giving the opportunity, and then one day it could happen again. So going to McLaren was really exciting. I remember speaking to Martin on the phone, and I think he was surprised that I was even thinking about going to McLaren. Anyway,
you contacted him, did you?
Yeah, and we sorted out a deal very quickly, and I was in the door at McLaren at the end of 2009. Well,
it certainly saw you right, because 2010, 2011, 2012, great years for you. What was it, 8 wins?
Yeah, we didn't...
Second in the World Championship?
Yeah, in 2011, We didn't win the World Championship, but for me it was some of the best racing I've ever had. I was racing against, I was racing with and against Lewis, who is obviously extremely quick.
And I would like to make this point that over those 3 years, you outscored Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah.
Yes. You must feel very proud about that.
Yeah, I am. There are many things I feel proud about over those 3 years. And, in terms of outright pace, Lewis is quicker than me over one lap. But, if you take three seasons. But Formula One's not just about being quick over one lap. It's the full package. It's understanding a car in a race situation. And it's an endurance in a race situation with the tyres, with the fuel. It's working with the engineers, the mechanics.
Yes.
And it's about the team effort. And for me, that was something I learned over so many years of being with different teams, and I think that really helped me when I arrived in McLaren.
Well, now, like I said, you've had your ups and you've had your downs, and the last 3 years have been a downer, and last year in particular. What is your mindset when you're going through a period where things just aren't going right and you can't see them going right in future quickly enough? And you're a world champion, and you're getting older, and you haven't got the right car.
Yeah. I think that probably 2013, it wasn't a great year, but you think, it could happen in 2014, we could be back. And then when you're not back in 2014, that was probably the most difficult year. for me, because I felt that we should have been back at the front winning races or fighting for wins. 2015, you know, to be fair, I knew it was going to be a very difficult year. You know, it's a new power unit. We're a year and a half behind everyone else in terms of the power unit. But in some ways you don't mind, because, you know, I'm racing against the guy that people think is the best driver in the world, and possibly the best driver since Michael Schumacher and Ayrton Senna. So it's a big challenge and an exciting challenge going up against someone like that, and working with someone like that as well, because, you know, we're both very experienced, but you still learn from your teammate, and I think we both learned a lot last year from each other, Fernando and myself.
Jenson, you, irrespective of whether times are good or times are bad, you always seem to be very happy in your own skin. You're friendly, you're cheerful, everybody in the team loves you, you talk to people, you relax, you have a good time. Are you happy with yourself?
With myself, yeah. I mean, you know, if I retired today, I would be very happy with what I'd achieved in the sport. But, you know, we're the creatures that we are. You know, we want more. We always want more. We're hungry to succeed again and again and again, and you get addicted to that feeling of stood on top of the podium with the biggest trophy, and it's such a special feeling. You know, you get addicted to it. So that's why I'm still here, hoping and working towards hopefully something great in the future.
How much longer?
I don't know. I mean, if I can see that next year is an exciting year, and that we could fight at the front, I'd like to race next year. I've got to do a good enough job this year first, really.
I'm sure you will.
But you know, I obviously have bad days. I have dark days, but you know, I don't show them to the rest of the world, because those are private times.
You've made a bob or two in your career. How do you enjoy yourself outside Formula One?
I'm normally really bad at relaxing. You know, I need to be doing something. I need to be active. I need to be cycling my bike,
Tell
running
me about
in the
the
mountains.
triathlete business.
So I do a lot of triathlons. One, to keep fit for Formula One physically, but also mentally. I think it really helps me. I've got my triathlon, which happens every year, which is in July this year.
When you say your triathlon, you mean the Jenson Button Trust?
Jenson Button Trust Triathlon, yeah, which raising as much money for cancer research, which hopefully we will do this year. We've got a lot of fun people coming along this year, which you'll find out about soon. But it's something that I've been passionate about for years, and it's since 2008, when we didn't have a competitive car. You know, I've got into it, and it's something I can really sink my teeth into. If I train hard, I do well. If I don't do well. So it's been a good hobby to have.
Do you think ahead beyond that? I mean, when you finish your Formula One career, are we going to have you in the commentary box? Are you going to be running a business? Do you have any plans?
I have so many ideas and things that I think I can achieve after Formula One, but there's no point concentrating on them too much. You know, Formula One is my life at the moment, and it has to be. You know, it has to be your life.
Whatever you do, you'll do it well.
Thanks very much, Murray. Cheers.